Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to see so many of you, and I'm happy to see people that I have not seen in this space before, um, and happy to see the new faces as well. I'm Cecil Giscombe, and with Jess Lasser, I'm the coordinator, the fall coordinator for our, for the Holloway Poetry Series at the University of California at Berkeley. This evening, we're very pleased and honored to welcome uh, Divya Victor to our Zoom stage. Um, she is coming, to us from Michigan, and she will be introduced by John James, who is coming to us from Kentucky. Uh, but the first reader is going to be Erica Hickby, who I believe is in town, and she will be introduced by Lydia Liu, who I believe is also in town. And Erica is the first reader, and so I will ask Lydia to start the introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cecil. And it's such a pleasure to have you here virtually, Divya. So it is my great pleasure today to introduce the student reader, Erica Rose Hickby. A graduate student at the Berkeley English Department, Erica is a poet and a scholar of Asian American Studies, Chicanx and Latinx Studies, 20th and 21st century American writing, and critical theory. When I first encountered Erica's poetry in a workshop led by our very own C.S. Giscombe, I was blown away. The experience of listening to Erica read her own work struck me as tender and intimate. Her lyric poems, often long and thin, have a quiet, unassuming music about them. The gentleness of this music belies the complex and often anguished realities of the worlds into which Erica's poems allow us but a stolen glance. These worlds are themselves ambiguous and their realities contested. The moments of closeness between a mother and daughter can be at once cherished and claustrophobic. Geographies and histories whose public natures we might assume in Erica's poems take on the instability of memory, deception, and fiction. In one instance, her speaker declares, "I will go to the place, if not the house, then the coordinates of earth, if not the coordinates, then the neighbor's words, if not the words, then the lie." As a poet, Erica pulls no punches. While her poetry might touch upon the intimate exchanges within a family or household, the speaker is hyper-aware of larger societal and historical injustices that are always in the backdrop of domestic life. The history of a family and its traumas are inexorably tied to greater historical traumas. Colonialism and the Vietnam War come to mind, but for the speaker, their legacies of exploitation, racism, and war are painfully alive today, for one in domestic realities and the fates of immigrant families. The affect of these realizations is naturally one of anger, felt in the body like a bitterness in the back of one's throat. The poet urges us not to turn away from this anger, for it would be to turn away from injustice. In the speaker's own words, "I do not blame my parents' hands. They are the hands that fed me, but every other hand I blame with blood." In refusing to numb oneself to social and historical injustices and instead insisting on the rightful culpability for the harms done by history and the politics of today, there is a brutal honesty and moral force in this poetic voice. Circling back to my earlier mention of music, I also think of Erica as a poet who takes a serious interest in sound, in both its aesthetic and political power. In these poems, sound is the substrate for language, and language the substrate for identity, politics, and history. The poet plays with the idea of a mother tongue that is unrooted, and therefore irrevocably fractured and incomplete, like our ideas of history itself. Take, for example, the exhilarating frictions between sound, memory, and belonging sparked in these short lines. When she hums what she remembers from the choir, super sound, home, the word falls apart in my mouth. If the injustices of colonial history and white supremacy are perpetuated by the stories they are told to, not least the characters in Erica's poems, stories that they may continue to retell across generations as the result of these harms, her speaker seeks to redress these injustices, not only by subverting these narratives, but also their very language. In many of these poems you will hear, English does not get the last word or even many words at all. The poet insists that we listen to all of her languages, that we become intimate with the domestic soundscapes of those whose native languages our societies have silenced and marginalized. And that perhaps we question the whitewashed soundscapes that are the norm in spaces, such as the one we are in, and question whose voices are not being heard where we speak. On that note, I would like to thank everyone for coming here to listen to our wonderful poets today. Please welcome Erica Hickby.
Wow, Lydia. I am so that was so beautiful, and I am so honored that you would introduce me. And I haven't heard my writing explicated by someone like you, and it was really, really such a heartening experience, and I felt very seen. So thanks, Lydia. Okay. Well, thanks for having me here. I am going to start with On My Way to the Mountain. On my way to the mountain, my mother tugs my hand. She shouts, as if I am 15 years old leaving our apartment at night. Don't go out there. It's dark. They'll see you walking alone and then they'll rob you. She says there are a lot of things you don't know about. I see the entrance of a firefly's mouth, as if it were a path to my ancestors. In its stomach is a house made up of my imagination. Again, the images I think I saw in photos somewhere. Vin, Jerome, Tin, Bakung, painting in a northern garden. Hung listening to comrades talk about LBJ pulling Americans out of Vietnam. Jerome in hiding, calculating the past week's expenses for the Southern Army. Vin ripping apart the poems that choir boys and Hung's other lover gave her on pieces of paper tucked in a book titled How to Speak French. I pick up the scrap and see a future where my mother is in love in her childhood village. Van is sitting in the corner, reading a book, watching my mother get yelled at. Anne is at school and his classmates avoid him because of what his father does. The teacher calls on him, and in this story, only him. And in this story, I pull my hand away and feel something like anger or claustrophobia or tenderness. And then I head towards the mountain. This next one is called I Believe Her. She remembers how it all looked. Return was an option better left unchosen. Her friends' houses were a bike ride away, and her name, a name in people's mouths. The image threatens us with disappearance. It risks life every time it is retold. It is more real than return could ever dream of being. One day I'll go back after she can no longer tell me not to. I will go to the place, if not the house, then the coordinates of Earth. If not the coordinates, then the neighbor's words. If not the words, then the lie. The woman whose name left along with the mouths, the memory flown out, sailing away from Exodus and from its own unraveling. When her name became ideology, forgetting became more crucial than remembering. I imagine the place now, conjure it with private words. Fountain, rice field, gas station, church, ceremony, floral dress. It is enough to say this place was once mapped by another timeline. Maybe there was something forgotten there too. Maybe it grew another place inside of her and I can't reach. Maybe she understood for a moment what we all wanted her to understand. At first, they were good people. They were against the colony. You mean the colonizers? Yes, because the French controlled us and they tried to stop us from getting dominated, but then they turned against us too. I believe her. I believe her. I believe her. I believe her. This place has a reason. There is a trail to trace. There is water to swim. My place has a reason. My birth, unreasonable for a reason. Probably my last one. I don't know how long I have. But as I attempt to speak Vietnamese, this is a poem that's kind of hard to read because of how I wrote it structurally, but we'll see how it goes verbally. Phonetic Homeland. Chào mẹ, con thương mẹ, con sợ, con không muốn mẹ chết, con sợ bố không thương con sợ con không biết mẹ, con sợ con không nói tiếng Việt được, con sợ bố dở, con sợ con học nhiều lắm, con không có brother or sister, con không biết mẹ's full story, con không biết tại sao mẹ act the way mẹ does. Mẹ của mẹ làm cái gì vậy? Bố của mẹ làm cái gì vậy? Mẹ có sợ không? Tại sao mẹ sometimes so cold? Tại sao mẹ ở với bố when mẹ biết là bố không treat mẹ right? Tại sao mẹ? Con muốn mẹ biết là con thương mẹ vì bố không phải là good for me. Mẹ có biết không? Tại sao mẹ sợ không kiếm bố hát? Con muốn mẹ kiếm bố hát. Con hate to see mẹ trapped in a cycle. Mẹ vì bố có nhiều sadness quá. So angry quá. Con không muốn see this anymore. Bố vì mẹ phải find yourselves or else. Mẹ vì bố có think about the past home. Or is it too painful home? Con remember mẹ sợ con. Con sợ cho mẹ. Tại sao mẹ sợ vậy? Mẹ vì con không phải ở với bố. Mẹ phải make so many deals with bố. That is not love mẹ. Bố is lost and mẹ muốn control. We might have thought mẹ knew more than bố and bà của mẹ. Mẹ probably had to withstand a lot from bố của mẹ. Con must accept how mẹ với bố is. Yeah.
Great, Cecil, should I go ahead and introduce Divya?
Erica, are you going to read another, or are you at the end?
I could have one more. Thanks, Divya. Okay, this one is called 1 week since we texted. The etymology of haven't heard from you. Are you okay? 1839, colloquial, originally US, adjective. Okay as in correct, all right. As in, do you remember everything I have taught you? Are you still the version of you that I have created in my mind? Satisfactory, good. As in, are you fulfilling expectations? As in, are you desirable? Do they approve? As in, well, in good health or order. As they ask in my country, 会啊? Can you stand the cold? Can you work like they ask you to? Does your stomach rumble in the night? Do you pray in order to survive the next day? As in, hai tuan nai da hui à? To be well again after 2 weeks of illness. Được, we have an agreement, a promise. We promise all that is possible. You are enough. At the same time, sacrifices were made, even though I say I have no regret. As in 1989 Japan Times, 21 May. He looks good, stable. He will be okay. 1883 B. Willis and A. Lee, Captain's Diary. I lay there in something of a trance, just praying I will be okay to bowl tomorrow. 1894 C.H.W. Donovan with Wilson in Mozambique. As our American friends would say, we were still okay. As in, do we still make each other? As in, switch eyes with me. As in, I need you to be okay, okay? My hand on the trigger ever since a life undone, a dry, bloodied mouth ever since something is coming. Okay, yes, hello, hello, hello.
Erica, thank you so much. Check your fan mail in the chat, by the way.
Thank you for the space.
Thank you for reading. I remember some from our workshop, and I was so happy to hear the new ones that were unfamiliar to me. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thanks, Cecil.
Okay, John, can you take over?
I think I can. And just wanted to say, thank you, Erica. I agree with Cecil. It was fantastic to return to some of those poems, and I just loved hearing the competing soundscapes and some of the ones that I hadn't heard. It's really exquisite work, so thank you for sharing that. So yeah, now it's my great pleasure to introduce Divya Victor. Divya Victor's curb tracks the self, not in, but as circuit. Its expression anchored in the migration from one place in one set of social and linguistic circumstances to the next. As the title of one poem suggests, location here makes locution, or vice versa, and it is through this ongoing and interchange that person, place, and language take form. Such poems constitute a geopoetics, a making forged by movement, whose sonic fixtures work as antipuns, signifiers with no inherent content, whose meaning shifts in relation to community and location, and often gets lost, though sometimes revels in, the gaps between. In hedges, for instance, language designates boundaries, indexing the limits of life and death, citizenship, and exclusion. But because language itself remains unstable, or perhaps out of fear or hope that such boundaries might radically collapse, the speaker obsesses over documentation. Until I was 11, she states, I slept inside my mother's passport. Measurements and coordinates acutely punctuate the collection. Elsewhere, Victor underscores the almost Newtonian logic subtending modern law enforcement. The application of cold and excessively rational language violently displaces physical bodies in space, often ones marked by ethnicity or otherness. In Blood, Soil, she states, the law says to every action, there is always an opposite and equal reaction. This dictum translates in real terms, not only to the paralysis of a newly arrived immigrant through the excessive use of police force, but to that officer's all too common acquittal. The victim, 57-year-old Sureshbhai Patel, did not speak English. As Victor states, his body was one of two that couldn't speak of its place. Therefore, they swept him leg under leg, therefore made him look close at hand, look close at the land, made him taste the verge between walk and veer. The inability to designate one's identity and therefore to demarcate belonging culminates in senseless violence. Curb, then, is not a noun but a verb, one that speaks to its potential both as a boundary marker and as an agent of restraint. Yet Victor works within these strictures to locate novel affordances, ones unavailable in the absence of the trenchant investigations these poems so rigorously undertake. While Curb offers little by way of comfort for the reader, and indeed it shouldn't. This book models a liberatory poetics, which illustrates the making of identity as it oscillates between geography and meaning, boundary and utterance, self and sense, and so on. It's a powerful book, and one I hope you'll enjoy hearing from tonight. Please join me in welcoming Divya Victor.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for having me. John, that was such an astute, caring introduction. Thank you. It feels good to read at Berkeley. I really wish I was there right now. It's a city I really miss. My parents lived about 10 minutes outside of Berkeley for a very long time, and then I made the move to Michigan, and I don't think they'll ever forgive me for it. Yeah, I have dear friends there, and I miss all of them. But it's good to be back in a way. Thank you, Cecil, and thank you, Jessica, for everything you've done behind the scenes. It's really a pleasure and an honor to read with Erica today. Thank you, Erica, for your really tender work and your angry work, which today, as I was listening to you, I recognized how many songs you've made out of scrap, the scraps of memory and the scraps of discourse, familial discourse. And, you know, I appreciate the effort that it takes for poets to tell the story, the partial story that we have left to us again and again, until it becomes whole enough that we can be the ones to shatter it, not someone else. I think it takes a great deal of energy and courage to do that. Thank you for doing that. And at one point in your reading, you said something like this, and I apologize if I'm misquoting you. You wrote, "It feels like anger or claustrophobia or tenderness." And then I head towards the mountains. So I took that as a cue to head mountains myself and my work. And then later you said, if not the house, then the coordinates. If not the coordinates, then the neighbor's words. So I will take that as a cue to arrive at the neighborhoods of my work in Curb, because I'm just going to read from Curb today. And some of you know it. And for those who are arriving to it for the first time through my voice, I want to say that Curb is a book that's interested in or worried about how immigrants and the children of immigrants traverse public spaces in the United States, and how we try to occupy and traverse those spaces between the model minority myth on one hand and the tropes and the dangers of the monstrous other on the other hand. And I think that space between these two myths that we live with feels like a kind of public space that we live with as well. And I'll read 5 poems from the book today, and one that I'll close with is a longer serial poem. And because some of the work today is concerned with and concerned about violence against my kith, I request that you don't consume the work passively. I request that you listen to it with ways of paying attention that are familiar to you, perhaps by writing down notes or asking questions of the work in a very active way. I think paying attention is one way of ethically being present to narratives of violence. And I want to begin my reading with a kind of symmetrical articulation to the land acknowledgement as a way of representing my position here, where I am now on this ground, here in Michigan, as an immigrant and a citizen of many nations across many times. And I work here as a visitor on Potawatomi, Odawa, Ojibwe, and Anishinaabe lands. And as in symmetry to that acknowledgement, I want to read Settlement from Curb. Settlers over the land, over the sea, over the tile, over the stone floors, settlers over the firs, over the pine wood planks of the house, settled, the houses settled into the ground, the houses so buried, settling, pulling life like splinters from the toboggans, and the caravans pulling cargo, settled out of suitcases, settled down. We settled in, and so settled we into our ways, and with those ways did we settle for this emptying of history, for this sternum rent in two, for this conscience as quiet as the snap of a wishbone sucked white. So we're going to stay here in the next poem in East Lansing, where I am. And this poem, Location, Locution, situates us in my dining room, an oval mahogany table. On one end, my little toddler on a high chair. On the other hand, my grandmother, white-haired, 4 feet tall, her great-grandmother. And she, the octogenarian, is singing the ABCD song. And we all know this, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And when we get to the H, the pronunciation of the letter H differs based on national, class, educational background. And the BBC's pronunciation unit now suggests that our views on received pronunciation, they've shifted, they've globalized. So while so-called, Queen's English and British dictionaries would have us say H as the standard pronunciation, they have also attested that H is a legitimate variant. So I'm very proud to be a legitimate variant today. And at the scene, while hearing my grandmother sing this song and observing her variation, her legitimate variation of the H, I began to consider how intonation and the pronunciation of letters and syllables are a kind of an inheritance, a kind of a wealth or debt, an economy that is held and expressed in the body when I code switch or I speak bilingually or plurilingually, to use Carolyn Bergwell's term, and kind of move in the tectonic slippages between the languages that I have as my own. So this is locution, location. She sings the letters to her great-granddaughter, strings them, marigolds into garlands in the order of the alphabet, E, F, G. She tugs the H, taut and long, far from the breast, a letter the length of a coast, the width of a gull's call. She now carries the H like I will carry the gurney, later, weightless hammer of feather. The letters swim with the orange petals around and around her, child and crone, milk flesh home, mouthly, smelling of talc and gooseberry. When that song sills, will we bury her in the sky? Cirrus flight folded into the pleats, riding the crest and trench of her sari's wave and weft? Will we be left with her H, a patch of ash, just voiceless and glottal, an open casket fricative, an open hatch? H, listen, I'm asking you for her tongue wrapped in twill, flung to its thatched edge. I'm asking for a body thrown so far it meets itself in the mouth. How do we bury her H? One glyph on either side, arm in arm, harm in harm. How will we use this twin-ruddered throat in an open boat home? H circles her T, water sunk by cream. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H floats my grandmother's child body, breastless, buoying, ankles cuffed in silver, scale sequined on its heels so it can stay and stray and swim with her when she is restless, sugar hungry, when she is 80 and 220 heavy, human, cane in fist, knife in hand in the kitchen thrumming. H, 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 the percussive hinder, the fescues of coriander, thunder. H, 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 turns the lathe with each exhale. H, 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 her belly wet with sink and soap. Its damp equatorial girth curls my mother into her mother, hatchet to hammock, split and swung. H, the waist in two. H, the lips in four. H, a longitude's wretch. I chart this stretch of tongue. I listen for how her breath measures the distance, pulls skin apart to etch the gravity of gravidity. My daughter pouts yogurt out, plumbs the berry, sun-smitten, filmed in milk, wades her phonemic fen, hailing her elder with bib and mitt. But when this song sills, where shall we dig? Us grandmotherless fools, us rudderless, us letter poor, with drum and dread, where shall we dig? H, 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 for this shibboleth of breath. Erica is saying in the chat, grandmotherless fools. Yes. I think I've written so much of Curb as someone who has anticipated being a grandmotherless fool. And it has helped me find my own language to replace in anticipation for all that I will lose with her. So this poem I'm going to read is titled Arbor, Ardor. And an arbor is obviously, it's a shady garden alcove. I love this definition, a densely flowering recess. I love that definition of an arbor. And ardor is passion, of course. And it comes to us from the French ardere, to burn, to burn. And this poem moves us from Michigan, where we just were located, to a town near Trichy in southern India, where I was raised, and where I came to know my body as quite distinct from my mind and had to work over the years to bring them back together. To write this poem, I ritualized the walk that I made as a 10-year-old from school back home and from home back to school. And while I was writing this, I would walk the same walk in my Michigan neighborhood in East Lansing. And sometimes I would shorten it in my study. And in the to and fro, the deal I made from myself, for myself, was that I would drag out one element of memory that I had forgotten into my conscious acknowledgement. And then I would try and find a place for it in the poem that I was building. So it was a very active reconstruction, the way a costumed play might be an active reconstruction of a historical event, taking place in my study as I was drafting it. It's a dramatization of absence in the writing. Arbor, ardor. We walk a pair past eucalyptus trees. The sentries flock off, the peach in the sky frame the street smelling of crochet. They dim the pink, usher us into the open air theater where everywhere this summer they will screen 12 rapes. One for each week we are out of uniform, one for each cheap peppermint, one for each soda clear as rose water, dense as glass. We walk a pair, slip-on socks fogged in red dust, orbiting what was once stone as dogs do dogs, hands the hips, and we walk the anywhere walks. Our first fuck-offs slip out the edges of our anywhere mouths, tasting flint and silt, tasting the selvage between two girls sewn into the landscape, spliced as we are to cellulose, camphor, fiction, strip over strip. We rate ourselves you for unrestricted public exhibition. Our talk sprawls across the street. We are drifting into dusk in skirts, a ruffle too close, a downy arm far, far too far past the serve everything's just this once's, past the grotto, frotting hibiscus over the Virgin's Cape, past the velvet apostles overdressed for this emergency, each halo a hymen between man and his God. We talk fast, fast, too fast into each other, pull words like shell after wet shell from the backswash. We draw ourselves in our own image in fast forward, the sillage of the ocean dragging itself back from us, girls, girls, girls. We talk and we loiter all summer, annexed into every garden we graze called rose, rose, rose. Clasp coins into purses, pocket all the curses, one for each time we touch ourselves, for each time we speak of how laps dissolve. The scene cuts, how a mountain range marks the cusp when one nation plunges into another. We just walk as girls do, book bags grinding into the small of our backs. We talk to patch the shredded blouses. We cork the gut to melt in fear of salt or glance. We take it in our stride. We count to 12 for each time a sari is unreeled on screen from an anchor and beached near the navel where the storyboard begins, pleats itself, then ends. We saunter into the grass, cooling the shape of us under a kite's scoot. We pierce apertures into our anywhere feet, stud our knowing to the law of sallow, count fireflies, soft, soft, lit, lit, envy their bellies blinking cold light, wait for ours to project. Us, 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 us. The projector beam. A stream of one albumin quivers all night. We sit, letting history catch up. But we have oiled our braids well to slip out of traps laid for us since we've known that roads never go where roads claim to go, since we've known how to hopscotch, how to follow the mild marble into mud, how to wait to cross over until the hard-boiled sweet cracks mid-sentence like a frame in two. I think I'm going to read a long section now. It's a section called Petitions for an Alien Relative. So some of you are reading along, I think. It's around page 37. The earliest memories I have as a new immigrant in the United States, in this country, and I was 18, it was 2001. It was the year that that the Twin Towers were approached and attacked and changed. And the earliest memories I have in this country is of us as a family sitting around the dining table in our small townhouse in Maryland, filling out visa applications, green card applications, applications that would let me study in this country. And each of those now I see as literary acts of collaboration, acts that are created to narrate a family's existence in this country, acts of explanation. And like many immigrants and children of immigrants, and like some poets, I became interested in composing small acts of disobedience into this paperwork that we were composing. And I became interested in not flattening myself out into a stack of forms. So this piece, Petitions for an Alien Relative, writes into a form called Form I-130 from the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. It's a petition for alien relatives, which allows people who are already residents and citizens of the United States to bring over those in our life that are called alien relatives who we don't find alien at all, of course. And there's an epigraph in the series of poems from the special instructions from the Immigration Services. And the epigraph reads, "Please do not include graphic photos of childbirth or intimate relations as evidence of relationship or marriage." I think that teaches us a lot about what the United States thinks about intimacy and affection and relation. It is a place where no evidence really counts. First petition. It is a Thursday, and no one out on this long street looks like your mother. So you go home, wrap yourself in Form I-130, knit a nest with a ballpoint pen, limn your ken inside a placeholder, smooth your limbs into a square to beg for a place for your first space. Her. Write a name into the petition in thin, improbable syllables. No one calls her by this name in the elsewhere because they know her fish market haggle, purse tucked at the waist, sari pleats pulsing like flushed gills. No one except the men who will ask her, "Ma'am, can you name 2 national holidays?" And, "Ma'am, who lived in America before the Europeans arrived?" So you plan it out, letter by letter in letters. Your mouth cupped to her cataracts. "Ma, just listen and answer the men who ask how she came to know you, if she intends to remain here. And sir, for how long have you known that Ma was a bowl made for 2, brimming beyond any border, red as the arrival of her face 7 years later? A paper apparition drawn closer and closer to you, by a queue unknotting at a frayed horizon in an airport when it is a Thursday, and suddenly she walks through the passport photo you once stapled at the edge of a petition to anchor her womb to your migrating heart. Second petition. A. Use this form if you are a citizen or lawful permanent resident of the United States who needs to establish your relationship to an eligible relative who wishes to immigrate to the United States. Right here, if you know this place as home, about a beloved whose skin you cannot live without, whose fingers know why the jasmine bushes will not flourish in your backyard in El Sobrante, why your batter sours too late, why no amount of sugar will make your tea sweet, why your front yard is scattered with pinions, why all mail arrives like a bird strike to the fuselage, the dotterels dawdling and then shredding the turbines, whose letters you fold and unfold until the creases give way and you put the pieces back together on the dining table to make a map for a country made of vein and sinew with hands pulled clean of wedding bands and raw rice, a map for a country of two. B, if you need extra space to complete any section of this petition, use the space provided in Part 9. Explain here again why they wish to leave behind the stone well where they first kissed you. With a large terrapin laps the shadow and circles around the mossy rock, overhanging the clutch of her eggs to circumnavigate a history of water trapped in land. Where ankles graze against cotton skirts stamped again and again and again with laughing doves carved into wooden blocks, where an open suitcase is an undug grave. Where a field of sugarcane is a bruise spreading purple through land owned by the IMF, a land free of flags, yet flagging, flagging, flagging. Third petition. I am filing this petition for my select only one box. I am filing this petition for my spouse, select only one box. I am filing this petition for my parent, select only one box. I am filing this petition for my child. I am filing this petition for my select only one box. I am filing this petition during the third shift at the mobile. I am filing a petition for her eyes and her tendency to leave jars open. That'll be 450, have a good one. I am filing a petition for her eyes and her tendency to leave jars open and the way a nape turning away from me. That'll be 1780, have a good one. I'm filing a petition for her eyes and her tendency to leave jars open and the way a nape turning away from me is a bride walking towards me, her hands veiled in a vermilion epic written with a crushed branch of henna. Yep, you'll find it right next to the coffee. Yep. Have a good one. I am filing a petition for her eyes and her tendency to leave jars open and the way a nape turning away from me is a bride walking towards me, her hands veiled in a vermilion epic written with a crushed branch of henna, its flowers kept aside, each of the 4 sepals pointing in one cardinal direction, the lobes spread thin and patient, each red stamen paired and perched, the petals ovate and leaning across the cliff of the night into the gasp of the hungrier hours. During the third shift, you do not see her as I do. Between the Haribo gummies and the sour cream ruffles, fluorescent, arms akimbo, sweet burrow, sweetest sparrow. Last petition. Or USCIS Form I-130, Spring Night Pastoral for alien relatives. Ma, remember when we waded into the form field and pulled pussy willow with inky palms, flicked buckeyes into checklist boxes, swung down and dropped down menus like banyan branches, cut terraces into the small print marshes, dragged yoked highlighters through, roved through the footnotes as you roamed unthreshed paddy. And we, yes, I remember we parceled our family into placeholders that September and huddled in the warmth of an archive set on fire. So I'm going to close. I'm going to close with a poem called Threshold. And I want us to place ourselves specifically in Olathe, Kansas. But I also want us to place ourselves in two other locations. One, Singapore, and two, Hyderabad, India. I began drafting this poem in 2018, 2019, in a belated act of witness, as all acts of witness are in some ways belated, to an event that took place in 2017. Srinivas Kuchibhotla was an engineer who worked for Garmin, the GPS technologies giant, and his name, Srinivas, refers to Lord Venkateshwara, the destroyer of sins. And Hindus believe that this divine force takes the form of a dark-faced deity with four arms, standing on a bed of lotuses, carrying a wheel, right? That navigating instrument, and a conch shell, the shell that announces in my traditions, in my mythologies, the beginning and end of battles. On February 22nd, 2017, Srinivas Kuchibhotla was shot in a bar in Olathe, Kansas by Adam Purinton, a white supremacist who believed that Kuchibhotla was an undocumented immigrant from Iran. And the shooter yelled, "Get out from my country," before he shot and murdered Srinivas. And then the shooter went on to other bars and bragged that he had indeed shot an immigrant. When I heard the news of that shooting, I was teaching and living in Singapore, a place that also used to be my country, my nation. And on that day, I was pregnant and moving into my third trimester, towards the very end of the gestation. And the child who emerged from that pregnancy is now almost 5 years old, 4.5. This is Threshold, and this is the last poem I'll read tonight. It's about 7 minutes long. It has an epigraph from Vijaya Nagarajan's book, extraordinary book on its ritual and its ecological implications in India. Sometimes the threshold is dressed in red dots, similar to the red dot commonly seen on an Indian woman's forehead. The dot is a symbol of the seed, the source of life. And it also has an epigraph from Mina Alexander. In the absence of reliable ghosts, I made aria. I had been carrying her 6 months. Within me, she could open her eyes. She could tell dark apart from light. She could know when daylight filtered through the cathedral, a ray breaking the sticky pane, cranberry-stained glass womb. When I read the news of the shooting, this belly plumed into an apse. It distended upward, a balloon hollow but leaden. These lungs lifted here, this diaphragm fled, bore through a tent made of ligament and rope. The billows screeched in these ears, pulled here, these legs apart, these toes went numb and cold. The ground beneath me collapsed, turned to dunes, and the sand quickened. Here, this belly carrying those pounds of flesh began to take flight. In seconds, it was here, this mouth pressing against here, these teeth, a pear balloon, hot flush with wet wings beating, with wet wings thrashing in these lungs, the breath and ocean of blood. This skin here, a dam detonating, a pulse here, pulling history towards these feet. When I read the news of the shooting, I was standing in our library, and this face fell into 100 sheaves of visas lost in monsoon floods, a long queue dispersing after bad news passes through breath and beard, a susurrus of shaking heads, shrugged shoulders. This face fell apart in the quiet hum of the air conditioning, soft surplus lisping off me, the bone simply giving way, the skin curling back, the cartilage of this nose spilling a bib over this here pale nightshirt. I needed this face to stay. I wanted this face to flee, to abandon me the way rats do ships, to stave off a starvation by drinking water, to make it to any shore, baby in mouth. I needed this here face because it was on my visa. I gathered it up, these knuckles driftwood, these palms sailcloth, these fingertips branched apart, each phalange dangled, cheap pens at the mall's Western Union, chained and paranoid about being taken elsewhere. The nails scratched the deck, and that sound drowned the sough of crowds migrating within one. When I read the news of the shooting, it was warm and bright outside. The cumin spun into ressam. The curds set just right. I called my mother. It was dark and cold where the news stained first, where the choke cleared, brushwood for a pyre where she was. I called out to my husband. I thought about my father, but I did not call him. When I read the news of the shooting, the blowback was a flight from the fear of ever seeing a photograph of my father's rib shattered, his blood staining the pocket of his faded navy pink polo, the one he wears on Costco runs for bananas, and 2 packs of Windex, was a flight towards the pale band of skin on his wrist where he keeps time. How he looks older, more lost when it isn't hidden by his watch. I pocketed this band for the arms I would offer myself as I begged in the months to come, for a place on a curb not wet with blood, for a question not always cocked. I remembered my father's future as a passport photo hung from an elm tree, as a headline, as a statistic gently rolling on a marquee. That brown face a stain between kin and ken, between breach and brotherhood on the floor near the boots of citizens, Americans, men. When I read the news of the shooting, These palms began speckling. Small white patches bloomed and turned to face me. Curds, splotchy with pale pink mulberries, stamped and dragged, red and unripe, between skin and muscle. This here body had crushed itself while reading the news. The she in me turned, faced herself. Cherry feet fluttered at a sweet sop bladder. A migrant heartbeat clattered like a clay pigeon. The middle of my sky was pressed pause. When I read the news of the shooting, these ears rang the phone lines of the dead, called for the knowing trill, the scatter of sugar, of a spoon circling a milk tea for one the other side of the world. When I read the news, the she in me was swollen and pressing, and I saw her dropping to kneel. Her brown belly collapsed to a city's curb, her skull crimson in the clouds, her sweet ear flung and clinging to the parapet. And at that cleft, for the first time, I saw her as mine. And then, hearing cannons sung in double time, I knew being mine would clip her life. So I slipped this burning hand into a place where this body hammers at its heart, and I singed its edges, and with shame, I scorched a hole into the photograph of an ancestor, blotted her dark eyes out to whiteness, charred her skin to a pale ash, turned her folded hands into smoke, and I looked within this here belly for those eyes that could tell dark apart from life. And I wished out loud so she could survive. Live, I said, in any skin, live. Thank you so much for listening.
Divya, thank you. Thank you for reading. And I must note I heard the last bit, dark apart from light on the page, but dark apart from life, as you spoke. And yeah, it's all there, spreading out.
Mm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cecil. Sometimes the tongue under duress sometimes really does speak what the poem meant to, I think.
The tongue don't lie.
Right.
I would think that people could unmute and say a couple of words to Divya, if that would be okay with you.